Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our post-lunch session. Hope you enjoyed your lunch and enjoyed the lemon posset. That was my favourite. I'm Steph Gittins. I am one of the directors of library sales at Oxford University Press, and I'm delighted to be chairing this panel this afternoon. Having spent the first 15 or so years of my career in publishing in the education K-12 sector, one of the things that took me by surprise moving to the academic and scholarly publishing sector was the pace and the innovation of business models in this sector. And I think it'd be really interesting to hear some insights today from a variety of different speakers about some of the models that we're seeing. We're going to be hearing some examples from open access books and textbooks, as well as audio and collective licensing. And hopefully it will inspire some sort of thought-provoking ideas around what we might be able to take into practice for smaller publishers as well. So I'm delighted to welcome our panellists today. I'm joined by Jack Macdonald, who is the Director of Library Sales at Cambridge University Press, as well as Kim Williams, who is the Digital and Audio Publisher and Co-Head of Europe for Princeton University Press, and Amy Ellis, who is the Head of Rights and Licensing at the Publishers Licensing Services. So just a bit about the format for this afternoon. We're going to have about 10 minutes per panellist presentation, and then there'll be opportunities for questions and discussion at the end. So do take a note of any questions that you'd like to discuss at the end. We'll make sure there's plenty of time. We've got some roving mics as well. So first of all, I would like to welcome Jack Macdonald, my counterpart at Cambridge University Press, to be talking a bit about their experiences with evolving business models in open access books and textbooks.
Thank you very much, Steph, for the introduction. Thank you very much for having me, and it's great to see everyone today. So I've interpreted this session as a kind of personal evolution as well as evolution of business models. And I can see, looking back over the past few years, how I have really changed my mind on a few different topics. And I'm going to look at first at open access books and then pivot over to textbooks for libraries as well. And if you ask me, oh, there we go. And there's the title, Michael. It's Why It's Good to Change Your Mind. If you asked me 5 or 6 years ago about open access books, I think one thing that I would always ask is, what problem are we trying to solve? And to be very honest, I was a pretty big skeptic about open access books, maybe only 4 or 5 years ago. I felt I really understood the problem we were solving with open access journals. Fundamentally, journals collections are really expensive. Libraries, top research libraries, need to have a complete collection. And there's a huge equity problem that needs to be solved with open access journals. But I felt like it was actually not necessarily a good use of money on books. I thought that any one book is inexpensive. Most institutions can afford any one book they might need. And we have a really sophisticated book supply chain. We have ebook platforms. We have a network of booksellers. They're really well distributed, or so I thought. And I had a particular issue with retrospective open access. When a book was made open access years after it was originally published, I didn't think that was a good use of funding at all. And simply, I just thought if anybody wanted to buy that book, they'd had plenty of opportunities to do that. Surely we've reached all the readers that we wanted to see. But over time, we've done lots of experiments with open access book models in those intervening few years. And I started to question my views on this. So one of these is our Flip It Open program, which I'm not going to go into all of the detail of, but it effectively research monographs start their lives as a normal book. They're sold in hardback, they're sold as ebooks, and at a certain point they flip to open access. And one of the reasons we did this was to gather some data to see the impact. So on the left-hand side, you can see the sales reach geographically on Cambridge Core in the first year of this book's life. And it reached 34 countries. And then in the subsequent year, once it was open access, you can see a big leap in terms of geographic reach. So this was the first point where I thought, maybe I've got this wrong on open access books. Maybe there is a real extra market there that we could reach. And then we did another program with something called Scope 3. And I'm really going to confuse you now because my colleague John just spoke about Scope 3, and this is a different Scope 3. It's spelled differently. Couldn't be more different. And Scope 3 is a consortium of research institutes and university libraries focusing on high energy physics. It's hosted at CERN in Switzerland. So that's my excuse for doing a big picture of the Large Hadron Collider that you probably heard of. So we arranged through this consortium several books of various different ages in high energy physics, and that's the area they specialize in. And they became open access at the start of 2023. And looking at one cohort of books, of 19 books, in the 6 or 8 years when we had these on Cambridge Core, previously when they were paywalled, we had 100,000 downloads. In the 2 years after that, once they were made open access, we saw 200,000 downloads just in 2 years. So a real explosion of usage. You can see one of these books, Loops, Knots, Gauge Theories and Quantum Gravity, published in 1996, had 3,000 downloads as a paywalled book on Cambridge Core, and then 10,000 downloads afterwards. And then Hadron's Quark-Gluon Plasma, which isn't going to be your next beach read, but it really does have a big market out there, published in 2002. So, it's been around for over 20 years. There are print copies in hundreds of libraries around the world. It's been on Cambridge Core available to buy, but it wasn't anywhere near reaching its total market. And so you can see from this data that even this retrospective OA of really quite old books by some standards had a huge impact. This was really inspiring for me, and I found it really exciting. This is why we should do open access, because you can have that impact and have that reach. It's not just about compliance with policy. This is why we do this in open access. So what this means in terms of business models and some of the decisions we've made off the back of this kind of information, we now make all of our titles available in principle for open access. If any institution or author wants to make them open access, we will try to make it happen. That's obviously dependent on funding being available. It makes us really increase our belief in the value proposition of book processing charges for open access books. There's a lot of discussion about BPCs, that they should be positioned as covering costs. I think really we've got a much brighter story to tell if we look at the value proposition for authors. Another thing that I think we all need to focus on is removing friction for authors. It can be a pretty labyrinthine process for an author to get hold of funding, to give it to a publisher. It's far too difficult, and I think we've all got to make that a lot easier. And I think the other business model that we are actively looking at is anything that will help us achieve more scale. That's the big question about open access book, is how big will it be? And we're trying to combine it with other business models like EBA and other library models that might perhaps double the scale of our open access books publishing. I'm going to quickly then look a bit about how our thinking on textbooks has changed. So not so much about open access in this case, but I think if you went back to the 2010s, I'd say some of the key ideas we had about textbooks were we categorized our books ruthlessly. They're either a textbook or they're not a textbook, and that determines the price, the strategy, the business model. The top priority naturally was about defending existing business. And I think all of the business model changes at that point really replicated print. They didn't really change the dynamic overall. Since then, we've changed pretty much everything about how we think about that. So the biggest thing we did was on our higher education website, we stopped thinking so much about the individual textbook as the item to sell to a library, but instead looking at the collection. And that did a couple of things that really changed things for us. So that meant that it unlocked a subscription model, which was possible as a collection. And I think we constantly for years had run up into this problem that things that we were presenting to the market as a textbook was not being used as a textbook at a university. It was either not taught that way, or it's just not an undergraduate subject to that institution. The textbook model, which is effectively a bundle, it prices that in. It knows that not every textbook is going to, just because we as the publisher consider something to be a textbook, doesn't mean it's going to be used that way locally. Since then, we've made great progress with the collection model. It doesn't mean the entire world is going to go in that direction, and we've seen a really big divide in how North American institutions buy textbooks and how students in North America buy textbooks. And that's okay for there to be several different business models out there right now. I think for us, though, that digital is the real priority. It's more accessible for students. It's available on day one of classes. It also, we've seen a lot of our existing business that was in a print adoption shifting into equitable access, inclusive access models in the US. And that's been a big driver of sustainable sales for us. A couple of other things that we're doing. One is we do an annual review of our data. So a book that we published 10 years ago as a textbook may not be used as a textbook any longer. It may not sell like a textbook. And we change the model. We review our list and we shift books around into our business models. And that's been a really important thing to do. And then one emerging trend is that there are a couple of ancillary schemes on a lot of textbook platforms now. Everyone is coming up with a new artificial intelligence tool. And as well as that, there's many textbook platforms that look at student engagement data to help universities to retain students and catch any failing students early. I think a big question is going to be, are those going to be wrapped up in the package of content, or are they going to be a business model of their own? Are they going to be so valuable that you can sell those separately? And that's it. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Just getting 2 computers running. I'm used to juggling jobs, but not 2 computers at the same time. So somebody please wave if I've left you behind as I'm talking. But hi, I'm Kim Williams. I'm at Princeton University Press. I do digital and audio, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about our audio journey along the way. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to speak about audio. I did see in the program that audio wasn't listed, so if you didn't know it was coming, I have you now. I love talking about it, and I could go on, and so Steph's going to wave if I go on for too long. I'm going to be kind of rattling through at pace, but I love to speak to people about audio, and my team do. Please come and find us. We've got a lot more thoughts than we can pin down in here. I'm acutely aware that audio publishing isn't always an obvious fit with academic publishing, and I think the things we do at Princeton, they're at the easier end, more obvious narrative nonfiction, but in parts of our list we've done other experiments with books that have equations in, or that are heavily illustrated, or have a kind of mechanical puzzle aspect, so there's an opportunity to explore a bit. But we may not be ready, but readers are ready. They really expect audio to exist, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Can I ask, we don't have a full crowd here, can I ask, can you put your hand up if you've listened to an audiobook in the last kind of 12 months or so? That's a good 2/3 of the room, thank you very much. Can you put your hand up again if any of that was non-fiction listening? A little bit less, about half, but good to see that. And how many people in the room know children under 18 who like podcasts or like audiobooks? Me too. Yeah, about half as well there. I think that really aligns with the trends that we're seeing in general. So I'll share my journey with Princeton Audio. I've got some lessons along the way that I'll briefly put up there, and I can share the slides afterwards if people want to see those. And just a few things that I'm excited about for the future of audio publishing. I hope it will spark a few ideas, resonate with you a little bit, maybe some things you're already seeing. I've also, as I said, I cut quite a lot. I had a very ambitious slide deck, and it was too much. So I've cut, and I know that we want to hear from Amy about collective licensing, so I will be respectful of the timing waves as we go. But find me afterwards if we have a few minutes, please. So here's who we are. And I need to share where we've come from to really give context for where we're going. So we launched Princeton Audio in 2018. It was the first in-house academic audio imprint. What we have on the deck here is a few recent and upcoming titles. We have about 175 audiobooks in our in-house imprint, and we've licensed about 500 to licensing partners along the way. That's about 6% of our overall kind of book list. For new books, about 30% are getting made into audio every year, and we're experimenting with backlist as well. We have some textbooks that are a bit trickier. We've got nature and art books that don't always lend themselves to the format. So I think we're happy with where we are at about 30. And we're coming up on 7 years now, but we're about to hit the $1 million mark for revenue. As we get into that 7th year, I'm really excited about that moment. The sales that are made at the point of the vendor are a lot bigger than that. What's coming to us is a smaller chunk, and that's one of the problems I'd like to talk about. But our ambition for Princeton Audio was to meet readers where they happen to be and to expand our audience base, to be multi-format for our authors as well. And audio has been part of the toolkit to connect directly with our readers. And that's been a strategic focus for the press of the last 5 years. We get really good user data as well from partners and from ourselves. We've done experimenting. We found ways to be playful. We have author interviews. We have editor-author Q&As at the end of the audiobook sometimes. We have an original 1965 audio recording of a debate at the end of the book about the debate. So there's a few things you can do to really kind of amplify and augment. We've also had some, author funding, research funding, charities and institution funding to make audiobooks. So there are ways to make things happen sometimes. And lastly, on this slide, I'll just say, I know our partner Glassbox is in the room, but sales of our audiobooks on our site are 21 times bigger, which is 2,000% bigger this year than they were last year. We're beginning to bring people in. They're modest numbers at this point, but again, that's kind of something to report and share with the industry. We realized really quickly how powerful audio is in helping us reach new audiences. Our listenership is younger, it's more diverse, it's more global than our kind of core book buying readership. Why is Whoopi Goldberg on your screen right now? I'm guessing it's a first for Redux, I don't know. But this is one of the highlights of actually our first year of audiobook publishing. The book is The Fire is Upon Us by Nick Buckler. It was an academic book. We had a print run of about 6,000 books planned. We've now sold over 30,000 across all of the formats. And what happened was Whoopi came across the audiobook edition because she follows the narrator Prentice on EMEA. She worked with her team to include the book in a birthday giveaway on The View, and she gave away audiobook codes as well. It's certainly our only book to appear on The View. And it's like it really had a halo effect on the other formats, not just the audiobook as well. So I have a bunch of instances where little things like that have happened and have helped us just find our reach. I'm happy to share those afterwards. This slide is just about the kind of the long life of storytelling, just encouraging us to think beyond the print format a little bit, if you'll indulge me. Stories, communication, the transmission of knowledge, they are part of what makes us human. We've been doing that as a species for 50,000 years. We've been writing for about 3,500 years, and we've been printing books for about 500. So audiobooks themselves are actually almost 100 years old, that talking books have been around since the 1930s. What if we're actually primed to take in knowledge by listening, and it's just the kind of structure of the academy that tells us that we have to read it with our eyes for it to mean something? What I'm seeing is the technology's now there, the demand is beginning to be there, and then I think the marketplace and the tools are a bit of a problem, and they've been a bit of a barrier, and I hope we can kind of work through that. I found out recently, even Princeton's history of audiobooks goes back decades. So we had an introduction to modern Arabic audio version on vinyl in 1957, which is just amazing. I wish we could get those recordings. So yeah, there's a lot there, and there's over 75,000 new English language audiobooks are published every year, and we want to be part of that. 6 years in, we've learned a lot. In terms of financial success, I would say early investment in audio came from trade publishers and retail-centered vendors. So the marketplace that exists right now, it's built for a certain kind of book. We're on the periphery of that, but it's changing. So for us, big idea books, global history, books on contemporary issues, popular science, they're very successful. Things are less predictable, so some really odd books have popped up through BookTok and social media and going viral, and then we see a spike in sales and we can kind of tie that back. Books using courses, of course, are popular in audio given pressures on students' time, and we have broad global distribution. So that's easy for us because we've got global English rights. It's harder, for trade publishers sometimes to be able to do that. I've got a list there of less successful things. For us, essay collections have been an issue. If we spend too much on a big name narrator, it hasn't been paying us back. And then very heavily visual books, obviously that makes sense. So if you actually just sit with a book and try and hear it, it's really obvious after a couple of pages whether it's going to make a good audiobook or not. And we're happy to give feedback and to just share what we've learned about that. So if I just switch slightly to the bigger picture of audiobook business, the industry is more than 10 years into double-digit growth at this point. I'm sharing some projections. I'm conscious that we're about research integrity and fact-checking here. This is from Business Wire. I didn't dive any deeper, and I haven't verified these stats because they're big numbers. The Business Wire says the global audiobook business is just short of $9 billion this year. That they expect it to grow towards $35 billion over the next 5 years as global interest in audio continues. There's growth for Spanish, Arabic, Nordics, and German predicted, and then English in English territories and in other world territories. Listeners are younger, and as they come into our academic reading world, they're going to have been primed for audio by their early experiences. Public libraries in the US and elsewhere have been such good supporters of the format. I don't know if we have librarians in the room, but thank you, we appreciate you. They recognize the appeal and the inclusiveness of audio. Non-fiction makes up about 36% of sales revenue. The listener base is broad and diverse. And we know the interest in the technology is there. So how do those financial models work? And what if we were able to build a destination for high-quality non-fiction or academic audio? And what tools would help us get there? So I'm just going to turn to probably a slightly meatier slide as I try and rattle through these things. So 5 areas I think are interesting and worth thinking about and looking at. So one big change driver for us is Spotify. 60% of audiobooks listened to on Spotify are over 5 years old. They're driving their readers by interest area, a combination of algorithm and human-curated interest. 7 of the top 10 audiobooks on Spotify last year in the UK were backlist titles, and then 5 of those were more than 5 years old. This is gold for us. Our content ages really well. And even in Audible, actually, I was really surprised I got the October through December sales not long ago, and our top-performing book from Audible in that quarter was a book on the lives of bees. The audio sales tripled last year for the book. Print and E rose about 20%, but the audiobook tripled. The audio revenue was double that of the e-book, and we think that's come from a podcast mention that drove interest in the book. So there's a kind of cross-pollination thing going on there. And then the second thing is non-English audio. There's a huge growth in audiobook listening outside of English. Markets there are in early stages of growth. Our partner Recorded Books now produces over 10,000 non-English audiobooks a year. They're offering advances for that. So it's worth looking at top-performing translations and thinking about the audiobook rights. Do you control those audiobook rights? Could you make use of them? Could you license them? Could you encourage your partners to do more with them? Third thing, synthetic voice. I think we had this mentioned yesterday. It isn't new. We've been chased for a few years, and I'm sure many of you have, by potential partners who have a kind of synthetic voice product or a digital voice product. It's quite good now, I say that. I mean, I'm in full support of human narrators and SAG-AFTRA and all of those important things, but there's a space for the books that would never get considered for audio otherwise. Apple Voice now, they've paid human narrators to create a replica of their voice, and those are the 6 voices they're offering at the moment. They do the conversion from EPUB, they do the quality checks, they do the work, and then as long the book has to stay on their platform, but could be offered to libraries as well. I don't think it's going to replace human narration and production, but it's worth considering for accessibility reasons alone, actually, and maybe to test out books that could have a viable life as an audiobook. And if you're going to do that, please make sure your metadata is clear about who's voicing the book, because we will lose track of that over time if we don't. Last 2 things. So students, they love audio, they love podcasts, they're multimodal learners. Audio is fantastic for first-generation students, non-native speakers, students with dyslexia, reading impairments, student athletes who are traveling a lot. So if you have books in the undergrad and grad courses, do think about audio for those. There will be a market, it's coming. And then that leads me to the market. Academic libraries, such a complex and such an important partner in our ecosystem, well aware of the big context we've been talking about this week and the pressures on budgets. I also handle digital publishing, so I really know how incredibly hard that is at the moment. But there's money being spent on video. Audio is another tool in that space to increase student engagement. So thinking about how the ebook market worked, the retail sector existed a long way before the library sector did for that. And then the existence of the library sector is what made ebooks much more viable for all of us to create more to ebooks, and I think audio will begin to map that over time. I had one last slide just to say when you have audio, you can experiment, and that's being really fruitful for us, so I'm happy to chat about that any other time, and I think I'm wrapping up. Thank you very much.
Right. It's the moment you've all been waiting for. We're going to talk about collective licensing and the impact that AI has had on collective licensing over the past year and a half, as it's affecting almost every other part of the industry as well. But I know that collective licensing is really niche, and a lot of people don't know who PLS are, what we do, and what collective licensing is, and where the money comes from. So I thought I'd do a little bit of an intro first. So PLS were set up in 1981 by the publishing industry. We are a not-for-profit collective management organization owned and directed by the 4 main UK publishing trade associations. So that's the Publishers Association, the PPA, ALPS of course, and IPG. And our primary role is to maximize the value of published content, enable its legitimate reuse, and protect copyright through effective collective licensing, permissions, and rights management services. We currently represent over 4,500 publishers. I think it's getting really close to 5,000 actually. And my slides are a little out of date. So last year, we actually distributed £48 million in revenue to publishers. And that was 15,000 payments to publishers as well. So it was a really good year for us and for you. For those of you who are unfamiliar with collective licensing was introduced to address widespread photocopying. So they're essentially blanket licenses that allow licensees to copy small extracts, so usually about 5% or 1 chapter or 1 article, from books, journals, magazines, and websites as well, without breaking the law. And it allows rights holders to be fairly compensated for this use as well, which is where the £48 million comes from. These are licenses that cover secondary use, so things that you wouldn't be able to license individually because it would be a massive pain to everyone and a lot of paperwork. So it allows people who have the content legally acquired to use it on a day-to-day basis. And to make that make a little bit more sense, we have a graphic that kind of shows the flow of rights from rights holders on the left to the corresponding organization. So PLS, we represent the interests of publishers, ALCS represent the interests of authors, and DAX and Pixel represent visual artists. So we are here to represent you in this commercial model. basically, publishers provide us with a mandate which allows CLA to issue blanket licenses to businesses, schools, all the higher education institutions in the UK, and the public sector, including the NHS. Collective licenses were historically covered usage such as photocopying and scanning, emailing articles around internally, putting things on an intranet, digital and print course packs, so university librarians putting things on a VLE. However, we know that consumer habits are changing. The introduction of LLMs has changed the way that people are using and reusing content in businesses. So we are working with CLA to evolve the licenses so we can continue to grow the £48 million that we paid out to publishers last year. And that's why we exist. So the role of PLS is basically to represent you and make sure that when CLA are developing or evolving their current licenses, that your voices are heard and your feedback is brought to them. So what we've done over the past year and a half is work with publishers on AI licensing, and we'll be continuing to work with publishers over the next few years, I'm sure, on more AI licenses. But we started with a soft consultation last year. We met with a range of publishers across a broad range of sectors. We did briefings with all 4 of our trade associations to get feedback on an early version of the generative AI workplace license extension, which is a mouthful. We brought the feedback we received from publishers to CLA. They adjusted the license terms based on feedback from publishers like you. We did a formal consultation, which we extended the time to allow for publishers to come back with even more feedback, because I know that AI licensing is very sensitive, and there's a lot of concern about making sure that your content's protected, but also you're getting paid for reuse that we already know is happening. And now we have a license on the market. So what I'm really here to talk about is how collective licensing is evolving in the age of AI. So I stole this slide from my colleague James Bennett in CLA from our last publisher consultation, because I think it kind of shows the history behind how the licenses have evolved over time anyway, and where we're going as well. Outside of blanket licenses for photocopying and scanning, CLA have been licensing a form of text and data mining since 2011 under the MMO license, or Media Monitoring License. This license allows MMOs, or media monitoring organizations, to scrape, index, and analyze articles from thousands of licensed websites every day. So when we decided to consult with publishers on a broader TDM license in 2023, we could prove to publishers that this isn't new, it's still within the scope of what CLA is already doing, and it's here to hopefully protect your content. The TDM license we consulted on was for CLA to offer existing business customers to allow commercial TDM without using AI tools. We started consulting on this slightly before the AI revolution, if that's what we're going to call it, and the license is now available for purchase by CLA's customers. And we're continuing to invite publishers to opt in, so if you haven't opted into the TDM license, get in touch. And we're also continuing to work with CLA on AI licensing, because with the threat of AI companies stealing publisher content, whether that's deliberately, as we know is happening, or through the accidental ingestion from end users just using ChatGPT day to day. We consulted on the workplace AI license to allow businesses and public bodies, such as local authorities, to use limited amounts of published content as prompts in AI tools. So CLA recently published a report on the business and public sector that showed that 82% of people who are using AI tools within businesses are uploading content, published content, your content, to those tools. And then our colleagues at Copyright Australia also found that 40% of AI users in businesses copy, paste, or upload publishers' content on a weekly basis to AI tools. So we know this is happening, and we want to essentially give these licensees guardrails about what they can and can't do with published content, educate them, and bring something that's already happening under license, and make sure that publishers and authors and visual artists are compensated for this use. But I think what's important to note about this license that we're getting publishers to opt into now is that it doesn't allow for training. However, we also know that many of the 4,500 publishers signed up to us need help with licensing AI for training, would like support. So when we did our soft consultation last year, we actually did a soft consultation on a training license as well, which got a lot of really good feedback. There was a lot of support for it. Even if publishers weren't ready to opt in, they supported a collective license being available and on the market, not only within the political climate where, you know, the government's trying to propose copyright exceptions for training and commercial TDM, but it's support for the publishers that don't have the resource or knowledge to do this sort of licensing themselves. So we'll be working with publishers over the next few months and years on AI training licenses and evolution of the existing licenses. So the educational license for schools, there's probably going to be an AI element when CLA renegotiate that license, and the higher education license when the long-term deal is up for that as well. We'll always reach out to publishers when there are significant changes or new licenses proposed to make sure that what CLA is going to do isn't going to affect what you're doing directly. And your feedback is always welcome and really important to us. So let us represent you. And if you have any questions, I'm always happy to help. So yeah, you can always talk to me about AI licensing and get in touch if you want to opt into TDM or the workplace license. Thank you.
Thanks so much to Jack, Kim, and Amy there. I know the question we all want to know is, Kim, have you now got Whoopi's telephone number now that she's an influencer? What a great story. Thank you so much. Some really different models to explore there. If anybody questions from the audience here that we want to ask our panelists? Thank you. If you wouldn't mind saying your name and where you're from first, please. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Val from OUP. I'm a data analyst in the academic data and analytics team. And so I was wondering, I had a kind of general question to all of you about where you think is the value of data in helping to, I guess, make sales, but also to like consolidate business models. And so I was really intrigued when you talked about how you review your data annually at CEP, and when like you're seeing shifts in how a book is being used, and then you're rethinking whether that continues to be a textbook, and whether you're going to change the sales model for that. So I wonder if you could all talk a bit more about that. Yeah.
Mike, do you want to start with that? Great.
I guess when is data not critical to that? It's everywhere, and I think we work in a really data-intensive industry just because there's so many books and so many channels. I think it's really fundamental to all of our business models and products. If you think about journals publishing, open access questions is the data is really formidable, and it's really difficult, I think, for all publishers to handle. But we can't really make any strategic decisions about any of our business models without large amounts of data analysis and really robust data beneath it.
Any other questions, any other thoughts about data and how you use it?
I go ahead. So collective licensing, because of the way it works, essentially licensees pay one flat fee and it goes into a big pot of money. Without data on what's being used that CLA collects, we wouldn't know who to pay out. So it's really important, and we're also able to make a lot of that data available to publishers. So especially in higher education, if you receive higher education money from us, we have a higher education usage dashboard that shows every instance of photocopying or scanning done in a HE library, including the course title, what pages from the books have been copied, how many students are on it. It's really granular data and really useful for publishers.
Thank you.
So I'm an English graduate who now spends her whole life in pivot tables and Excel and everything else. We're fortunate that we invested in, we use Power BI, so we have a place to put all the data, but we're getting more data than we could possibly know what to do with. Spotify, for example, we got the postcode of the listener, right? And I don't know how I would use that exactly, but I know it's there. I think it helps us think about who we're reaching, and I think as publishers, one of the most important things for us is going to be to tell the story of what we do, right? What do we add to the ecosystem, and what's the value proposition? Because you can use tools to take a text and turn it into a book, and it can go live. So what is the added value? And I think that needs to be data informed. And I think knowing who we reach and how we're reaching them, how that's changing over time, and what the different demographics of our kind of broad interest areas and deep niche areas are. I think that's all completely fascinating, and I really love spending time on it. So I think we all we do hire a lot of humanities folk in general, at least in my bit of publishing, and it's a joy to see people upskill and learn to work with the data. So yeah.
Actually, something that's been really interesting development-wise from the apprenticeship scheme this year is that there are data apprenticeships available, which our organisation is making the most of. There's also some in AI as well. So I think if you don't know much about them, have a look at them. There's some level 5 data apprenticeships, which might be a good thing to look at for some of your employees. We're certainly trying to get as many of our team members through that as possible. Thank you. Good question. Any other questions? Thank you.
Hi, Jure from Ljubljana University Press, Faculty of Arts. About the audiobooks, it sounds really nice, but I was thinking about our books, and most of our books have all kinds of tables, graphs, illustrations, photos. If some of them, just few of them, some a lot. How you solve that? Because when I was thinking about, let's say maybe 10 or maybe 20% of our books can be read without that material. How can we approach audiobooks with that kind of books?
It's a great question. I sympathise. We have a nature list, so I sometimes look at the ID guide to gulls and think, can I do that with audio? I've been talking to Apple a little bit about the existence of alt text, right? So we need to create alt text for the European Accessibility Act. If alt text is good, it describes the image really adequately. And what can that piece of the puzzle do to help us take a book and turn it into a text that's about to be read, a script that's about to be read? I think there's a lot of learning, and I think there's a lot of kind of testing of user experience to think about. I think the reason it's a problem is when we spend a lot of time preparing the text or a lot of money creating an audiobook. I think there's some tools along the way that are going to help us get most of the way there. And I think one thing I took out my presentation was that we get a lot of feedback that people find us in audio, and sometimes I'll get these slightly cross comments that say, this wasn't a very easy listen, so I bought the book as well. And I think, that's terrible for me. How many formats would you like to buy? I think also there's a discoverability and exposure angle as well. It all needs addressing and thinking about. And there are certainly, I can't hold equations in my head if they're read to me. That's a problem for me. I think some people who are deep in the subject can. And also finding people with the right expertise to read it accurately is the most important thing for academic, because we have a responsibility, and if we're putting something out there, it better be pronounced correctly. We had I'm going on now. We had a book on Stalin, and we did 1,500 pronunciation prep research pieces to make sure that book was perfect.
Great question, thank you. Any others? One thing I was thinking about when I was listening to the presentations about where there might be particular advantages or disadvantages for smaller presses or university presses in terms of being able to evolve their business models. I know at Oxford University Press we have dedicated work streams looking at the development of business models, and we have sort of pricing teams, data teams looking at that. But sometimes even for an organisation that's quite large, it's difficult to evolve those business models. Operationally, you need to make sure that works. You need to look at the existing revenues and making sure you're not sort of changing a model somewhere that might have an unexpected consequence somewhere else, or an unintended consequence. Are there any areas that you think actually it would benefit smaller publishers to be able to evolve their business models more quickly or in other ways?
I mean, for collective licensing, especially with AI, I know I've spoken with a lot of smaller publishers and they just don't have, like I said, the knowledge or the skill set or the resource to do that kind of licensing directly. So we'd really like to get a training license on the market to help those publishers. That would work complementary alongside any direct licensing that publishers are doing themselves. So collective licensing is a big benefit for smaller publishers.
I think textbook content is one area where I'd say that, because we're really a small, maybe medium player in textbooks, probably more on the small side. That's meant we could take more risks, change the model. We don't have. I think that in an area like that, if you're a very big textbook publisher, it can mean you've got too much to lose and to take risks. So I think the smaller you are, the more agile you could be in a market like that.
Yeah.
Textbooks, you have to be so agile, and if you're a bit smaller, you can be. But I've spoken to a lot of partners who are just hemorrhaging print sales into the course market. And when I speak to them, I say, "But do you offer those same books through digital platforms?" And they say, "Well, no, they're not textbooks, but that's the way they're being used." And we're seeing triple-digit growth in those channels at the moment. You have to have all the books in them, in my experience, in my view. So it's that kind of carving up what used to be a silo and thinking about it as a whole.
And have there been any model experiments that you've made in your organisation that haven't gone as well?
I think we're not doing our jobs if we're not making some mistakes along the way. I know within my audio program there were things that we did that we knew wouldn't be immediately financially successful, but we did them for different reasons. For changing who you hear from as the voice of authority has been a kind of core principle of the program, and that doesn't always come with an immediate payback. And then we've spent money in ways as we were learning, and I think you have to have what is the setup and the learning and the failing fast phase, and what are the expectations for the later phases. And I think certainly over the last few years we had to hold our nerves a little bit through what looked like a very extended plateau in audiobook sales to come back this year, and this year's revenue was double last year's revenue, and that was a big sigh of relief for me, for sure.
And I think going back to textbooks again, we did, I think, crack a library model in 2020, but that's after 7 or 8 years of failing and getting it wrong and trying something, taking it to market and getting shot down because we couldn't get it right. So it does. You do have to try these things a few times to get them right.
Questions from our audience? No? I think we should probably talk as well about the AI changes here as well. You mentioned, Amy, about the complications in terms of getting the licensing wording corrected, and it's great that you're working with other publishers to do that as well. I know that's something that we're all very concerned about and looking at. Are there any particular AI innovations that you've been looking at in your organisations that will perhaps add to business model evolution? Are there sort of funnies that you're seeing that could have potential advantages, or are there any sort of pitfalls that you're seeing already that we need to be careful to avoid?
I can start with one recent example, which was quite exciting, and it wasn't exactly a business model, but I think it's related. Just talking to a researcher who wanted to apply AI to some of our journal content. And it was research about research, so it was looking at trends in research over time. So last year, he had to hire a team of 6 or 7 people. They took 6 weeks' work, paid work to do that. This year, he's done it through AI tools in a day. So you think that's that real breakthrough in efficiency in research, which could have lots of implications elsewhere. So that's quite exciting.
Yeah, PLS as an organization did a full day of AI practical training on Monday this week. So we're all thinking about different ways that we can use AI internally to make our jobs easier, because there's only 18 of us, so we're quite a lean organization. We're always looking for ways to reduce admin. But one of the things I wanted to mention on this panel was the instructor mentioned through anecdotal evidence mostly, that his academic students are using AI to turn journal articles into audio. And it's become much more of a trend. So I thought it was really relevant to probably a lot of the publishers in this room, especially Kim.
Yeah, that's so interesting, and I think it's a Google Gemini tool. Or, forgive me if I'm wrong, but where you can pop in a text and it will turn it into a conversational podcast as a dialogue. And obviously the examples you see in the media are often very carefully curated to be the very best ones. But just, we have a podcast and we have a person whose job is to help generate ideas. But what if that was a tool where in a closed and safe environment, we could pop in the text and it could help us get some of the way to prepping a podcast and getting it out there and making the books more discoverable. I think as a tool, it's really fascinating, and then just being safe and understanding what we're signing ourselves and our authors and our readers up to is the really hard bit. But the tool pieces are pretty obvious, I think.
Are you seeing examples where your end users, either customers or researchers or institutions, are perhaps resistant of any use of AI within the business model itself or within the product itself?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of the great things about UK collective licensing is we need visual artists and authors to come on board with the licenses. But obviously there's a lot of fear from authors and artists about their work being used in AI. It's their livelihood. It's everything that they work on. So we've been working quite closely with them to bring them on the journey with us. But I think publishers would really like to move forward quicker than they would, just because we know it's at stake. We know things are being used in AI already, but it's just how do you soothe some of those fears.
We've done a lot of work to ask our book authors if they'd like to participate in any AI licensing or any AI activity, and that's been a lot of work, but it's been quite successful. There've been some people saying no, but I think things like the meta libgen story actually changes minds. I think that will make authors think they would rather go down a legitimate route.
When authors are saying no, what's the sort of reasons that they're giving?
It's as Amy said, it's kind of fear of what might happen. It's a lack of control, not trusting what might become of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's pretty smart. So I've worked on backlist digitization projects in my time at the press, and that means going back into the archives and looking at our first kind of forays into saying, we'd love to make an ebook, would you mind? And I've seen, there's tons of authors and records where they say, absolutely not, this is a threat to what I do. And then, often the reason I found that is because 15 years later, they've come to us and said, I really need an ebook for my students. Could you make one? So it's just tying all that together. And that makes perfect sense to me. It's new. And this is newer and bigger and potentially more frightening than any of the steps we've had in recent memory. If you'll indulge me for a bit, I just read The Bookbinder of Jericho, which is Pip Williams. It's based in Oxford. It's about the early Oxford University Press, and it's in a moment in the First World War where their kind of technology is changing and men are going off to war. But the jobs they had there were people using bone tools to fold the books into folio and quarto pages, and to hand sew the spines and to do the lettering on the books. And it was a really really interesting read for me, because I don't feel the loss of those jobs in our industry. I don't think about that as something that's no longer there anymore. But it was a huge employer. But other roles have absolutely popped up that in the time. So I think we've really got to protect our people and our skills and think about them. But I think we've also got to think about how can we use the tools to make the work more interesting.
Yeah, thank you. Great, thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm Fiona Council from Taylor and Francis. It's a question for Kim, really. A specific question and then an invitation to expand more. Has the audio ever led the conversation in commissioning a piece of work? And I'm interested more broadly on the relationship that you have with those who are commissioning the books and sort of what that development process looks like. Sounds fascinating.
That's a great question. So I know that we've had, we work with agents and we work at auction, and audio has been central to some of the pitch conversations that we've had, especially where the authors have a history of audio, or if they particularly want to narrate themselves. They're often interested in coming to us because we've done an awful lot of that and we've helped authors narrate for the first time. So it's been part of the conversation. I won't pretend it always is. Sometimes it's considered just a perk, or it's even an obligation sometimes for our authors. There's some great social media feeds of authors who are kind of going through narration for the first time, just getting more and more exhausted as the days wear on. And yeah, I was really lucky to hire a curator of audio position 3 years ago, actually, in my colleague Danielle de Orlando, and she works really closely with our editorial team to try and guide and advise what we think is going to work and what's not going to work, and how those ideas come together. We get a lot of, can I have Morgan Freeman, or which, if he decides to digitally clone his voice, then perhaps we could down the line. But it is some of the most fulfilling bits of the job are around those conversations, for sure.
Thank you. I'm going to invite any last questions for our panel. Thank you. Okay, well, in that case, I'd like you to please join me in thanking our panellists for our conversation this afternoon. Thank you. And I'd like to invite Deborah to come up to give some closing remarks. Thank you.